so she could like look at it, because this was like this far off his head. I mean, it was just like a huge knot. And she
So it's gone down completely, or pretty much. So.
And she asked him a few questions, and of course he was being a smart aleck, and she's like, "You're fine."
I think you're okay if you're talking like this. Okay, I'm going to just go through it, like I said, ask questions at any point or at the end, whichever you prefer. Dyslexia is a genetic, and it's a glitch in language processing. It's defined as an unexpected difficulty learning to read, and the reason it's unexpected and the reason it's overlooked so much is because it is unexpected, because the child is fully functioning in all other ways, and often just even of higher intelligence in some areas. So that is the problem with it, but the good thing also about it. And we were talking about how they have MRI imaging now where they can watch what a brain does when you're reading, and so the skilled reader, not the learner, but the skilled reader, you'll see activity in the back left hemisphere. And that's an area where as you learn to read and you recognize words and analyze them correctly a number of times, it creates a representation or a model in your brain. So there's this express pathway, and you no longer have to analyze the word at all. It's just presented to you when you see it, that word recognition. But for the dyslexic reader, there's more diffuse activity in the brain, and it's usually in the frontal lobe and right hemisphere. So it has an alternate route for word recognition. And I put the little graphic, I told you it's not very exciting looking, but gives you the idea. If I'm reading, I look at text, I decode it, or at this point probably instantly recognize it, and then it goes using these other, on some level my vocabulary or reasoning skills, I'll get the meaning of the word. For Charlie, it's at the most basic level. It's none of these other things, it's his decoding. That is where the glitch is. So he'll see text and go to decode it, and they call it sticky sounds, because that's, as a little kindergartner has to learn how to separate sounds so they can sound out a word. The dyslexic child has difficulty with that. That's the problem. And so, but instead of using word recognition first and then gaining meaning from it, the dyslexic reader will come the opposite direction. They will use the context and then use their intelligence, vocabulary, and so forth, and then recognize the word.
That's exactly what he does.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so, and then what you'll see is if they have time, because it just takes a little more time for this process than instant recognition. And they can develop some instant recognition, so that's important too. And there is some evidence that because he's so young, there can be some rewiring. I think he will always have dyslexia, but I think he can rewire a little bit. You maybe use more of the back.
Not take so much time.
Yes, exactly. And so there was an example I read recently where a little girl she knew all about volcanoes but she was asked in class to instantly recall the word volcano, and she came up with tornado. And the reason is because they are similar, but they're sticky sounds. She can't pull those two apart instantly. If she had been given time or not, hurried, she would have come up with a volcano. So that's kind of an example of what's going on. And then as far as the sessions, our goal in assessment, there's usually an independent level of reading and instructional. The independent is everything's easy. You can read that easily. An instructional level, the student uses things but confuses them a little bit. And then the frustration level, the concepts are too difficult. It's frustrating for the student, and they don't learn very well at that level. So we're always aiming for that instructional level. And you can see the assessments. I just did little tables. We started out with a spelling inventory, and it was dead on. You told me he was not behind in spelling, and sure enough, his spelling was at first to second grade level. And those are the features, the reason I did the assessment is it gives me a starting point in spelling. What does he use consistently? What does he use by confuse? And that's where we start. And it was just completely, I think he missed 2 blends, DR and TR, but he had everything else up to long vowels. And then he did use the long vowels, but confused them. He knew that, oh, these words are different than short vowel words, and I need to do something different with them. And he actually was pretty inventive on what he decided to make that word be right. But they weren't right, but he did a good job. And then after that, he, of course, it's way past his grade level even of what he would be doing. So the spelling was dead on. The reading, I could tell he had decided these are decently long passages, and he had decided he was going to do very well. And he worked really hard at that passage. And he got a 93% on word recognition, but the comprehension was not good because he was working so hard at figuring those words out, he lost track of what it even meant.
Right.
And I don't know how much, I kind of just even hated to give him those assessments right on the heels of his school assessments.
Yeah.
I just thought, I just don't want to, and he did kind of, I think that one day you could tell maybe he came out and he was just done, I am done. And I thought, we are done actually, and I'm thankful because, and so because he is, another interesting thing though about the errors he did make when he was reading, they were all substitution errors where you see a word and you put another word in place of it. He didn't mispronounce things, he didn't reverse things, he didn't do any of those types of errors. That's really common with dyslexia because you're trying to use context, so if a word might make sense in that context, you might substitute it if you don't know what it is. But based on the amount of effort he had to put forth, almost instant deterioration about his attitude about reading, just from reading this. And then the next one I did, it was a level lower and still was too frustrating, even though he did okay, but it's just not right. And the substitution errors, that's when you don't know what several words mean, so you just substitute. And you don't want to keep reading at that level. You want to mostly recognize the words and just have a few you're learning. So we dropped to level B, and it worked really well. His attitude improved, and then if you turn the page, there's a assessment of his progress. You can see how he started at C, and then I went to B, and then that steadily increased. And this is like week by week. I mean, this is not like, oh, I waited 4 weeks and then did another assessment. This is every week. And so he jumped to C at the end. I decided, well, he's doing so well, I'm going to try C at the end, and you could see, and there could be many factors that go into that jump, but I think it's pretty solid. I would maybe stay there a little while, because the point is these are shorter selections. They repeat words frequently, and that gives him practice with those words, because that is what he's going to need, is just practice, like a sport. If he likes baseball, if he wanted to become a professional pitcher one day, he'd be pitching every day almost, or when his arm could handle it or whatever.
So basically repeating those words is putting them in there, and that way he can just have recognition.
Yes, this is developing his word recognition skills so he can read faster. And there'll be a couple different approaches, but I was going to show you the book he read. I'm giving it to him, and I told him that, but I said I'm going to put it in so your parents can see it. But he grabbed, this was a turning point to me. He was excited about these books, and he grabbed this, and he's like, I want to read this, and read it, and then said, I want to read it again later. And that's what you want. And it's kind of hard to do. You have to work hard, to keep motivation and interest, but that's what you're wanting. It's like, yes, the book, the book. Oh, so anyway, let me see. I did a kind of a qualitative assessment of Charlie, mentioning his strengths. His personality is a strength. He's really kind and pleasant. He's very creative and inventive. So any instruction needs to emphasize his strengths. And I would say that's one thing as parents, you're his guardian in terms of this condition. Because people do not always understand it, and they'll think, oh, he's just not trying hard enough, or he learned those yesterday, he's just being lazy, or that kind of attitude you need to guard, that he does not get that kind of input. and we started out just from meeting him briefly. I could tell what kind of person he was, and so we did an acrostic of his name and had good features and qualities that I think characterized him for his notebook. And then I used fishing, baseball, nature, his color blue he liked, things like that, and integrated those into what we were doing so it's along his interests and strengths. Let's see, what else? Kind of explain the levels. Reading selections at level B, I'm almost at the end, second to last paragraph. They're brief and contain repetitions of high frequency words. Since I didn't have sight words, it worked out fine because I just,
Find 'em, I'm
it's
sorry.
okay. He'll see them soon enough. I just used Fry's list of words where he has them in levels, and I think they comprise, there's 300 words total. We, of course, didn't try to go all 300, but I selected words that fit with what we were doing in word sorting. And so those are words, I think they comprise about 60% of what's in basal readers. So I thought for school purposes, these are good words because this is the kind of reading, these are the texts he's going to get, the words he's going to confront in class, and all of that. So we kind of worked on that. I used those words to the best of my ability. Charlie, in these level B books, he was not overwhelmed by the length, the difficulty of the text. That allowed him to focus more on the meaning of the text, which that's what you're going to want to do. You're going to approach this practice for instant recognition, but you want to build the comprehension because that's his tool.
Yes.
So those are the areas he really needs to be strong, maybe more so than others. And he's very intelligent, so it's not going to be a problem. Since Charlie's attention is sustained when reading, he realizes more often when a word does not make sense in context. So then he self-corrects, and so we kept score of these are ratios. It kept getting more frequently that he would correct himself, recognize, oh, that doesn't make sense, or something's wrong with that word. I'm going to correct myself. So that's another thing you're looking for, is not just how many errors he makes, which that's pretty good, but is he correcting himself when he makes an error? Because that's not counted as an error if he corrects himself. That's a benefit. So he ended at a good point, I think, and it's not super duper below level, but he definitely needs, he needs to catch up without doubt. So, like I said, I'm going to skip over 4 and 5 for the moment, and then we'll come back to a couple of things on those, and you can look, of course, at any time and read it. But my suggestions for you are to communicate. I think you need to be the kind of communicator with everyone involved in his reading and remediation. And you want to make sure it's consistent, that his interventionist is not having him do this thing over here that has, they may have different activities, but needs to be, consistent. So he's not trying to learn 5 new techniques at once, and it's just frustrating. And another thing that can sometimes happen is a classroom teacher can go, oh, he's receiving reading assistance, so during our reading classes, I'm going to send him out, and they'll take care of it. So then he gets less reading instruction instead of more. So that's just kind of things to look for. I think it seems like New Waverly schools are pretty good, but I don't know tons about the area schools because I'm kind of new in the area, but I doubt they would do that, but you never know.
Now, we talked about that a little bit, and we're all pretty much winners. Since his issue is the reading and decoding, that's where he's going to spend class time doing that. And during other activities is when he'll be pulled for additional help.
Okay.
Is the plan.
Okay, that sounds good.
His comprehension is good when he's read 2. It's him reading it himself that his comprehension is bad. So I think he'll get extra help during testing and stuff like that.
Right, accommodating for that
So far.
one weakness. All right, so that you kind of covered that base, and I figure you guys are obviously well-educated and intelligent people, so some of this may be a little, but I'm just going to go over what I think. If it were my child, what would I want to do? And I think another thing that can sometimes happen in remediation is they will say, okay, he's not comprehending his text when he reads it. So we're going to work with him on that, and he approves. And they end the remediation without ensuring that he is actually caught up. And that's actually the signal of the end of some special intervention, is when he's fluent at his grade level. Then, and I don't know what kind of discussions you would have to have with a school if they want to do something different. You've already had similar ones, so it probably shouldn't be new. But I'm not downing the school.
Right.
I'm just saying there's
That's
only
a fact.
limited resources and all of that. So that is your marker. He is reading fluently on his level, so he is able to now drop back from intervention and just be in class. But we'll still continue to check the situation until we're sure he is just really progressing and so forth. So let's see. I think one of the key things is his self-confidence. I thought that book, that's the other thing about the little fishing book, I thought, to me, it seems like different from even yesterday. He is thinking, I'm a reader. I like this book, I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to read it again. And I felt like there was a shift. I'm sure there'll be ups and downs, just like for anybody, but for Charlie. But that's, you just want him to feel confident. And I made a point to discuss with him at some point about the first reading he did, because he was working, if you can imagine that maybe the words really pretty much don't make sense, and you have to, it's like reading, Russian, and you're, like a few letters, and you're trying to sound that out. That is a lot of work. So I told him, you work really hard. He goes, thank you. He was validated. So that's the kind of thing, just building his confidence and esteem. And other hobbies like fishing and baseball are really good, because then it's not, his whole life isn't about, I have this reading issue. So those are all good things, and I think you're doing those things anyway. But I think he should not be required to read orally in class. I think that is really important. I think that if he wants to volunteer, fine, but I don't think he should be called on. That is just one of the worst things that you can do for a child with dyslexia. So his oral reading, that's where you may come in, is if the class is doing oral reading of text, then that's the text you can start with at home. We're gonna, co-read this, and you might read it first and keep it in short passages so it's not overwhelming. I'm gonna read it, we'll read it together, and then you read it, and maybe spend only 15 minutes or something, just so he's still practicing with text that's on level. So, and of course keeping up with the schoolwork. So, let's see. So you're reinforcing the school-based readings. That would be top priority. You might even see if you can get a second text so you can read along, or get it on CD so he can listen to it while he's reading, different things like that. You want to encourage on-level independent reading, and that's where I got this. Yesterday, I was going to return a book to the children's section that we were using, and Charlie did this screeching halt at the entrance of the children's section. It was like, no way am I going in that section of the library. So I thought I'd give you a heads up that he thought that was not his place to be. I don't know if he has older siblings and he just thought that was babyish, but he wouldn't even come in there with me. And I said, okay. So you might want to go look for books yourself and bring them to him. I don't know. But this particular librarian was very helpful, and I got her card and told her I was working with Charlie. I didn't even tell her his name, but I just said, I'm going to give this card to his parents. If you don't mind. She said, sure, I'll be glad. And she found the Skippy John Jones. I think she's really up with what's coming out more currently that kids are really responding to, so that's why I used her. We did this pigeon. This is another example of co-reading above his level that works. This duckling gets a cookie. I had him read the part of the duckling, and I read the part of the pigeon because it's a lot harder reading, so he could read, and then I chime in here, and then he reads here, so you can make it fun and not like, oh my gosh, I have to read this whole book and I don't know half the words. So Skippy John is interesting because it's a great series too, because it has a lot of, it'll just be going along the way you would expect and insert some vocabulary word that you're kind of going, okay. The one on, I think I have the other one on mummy trouble.
Yeah, it's right.
Well, first of all, it's a play on words with his mummy and a mummy in Egypt. And then it uses sarcophagus, sphinx, all these fairly high dollar words. And so I just brought some photographs, and he had no problem, sarcophagus, that's a coffin, and all that. Like, we figured that out real easily, and that's extending his vocabulary. So those are ways you can, and it doesn't make it, you don't have to teach a 30-minute lesson on vocabulary so he hates the book before you start. You can just, and then some of it has a lot of Spanish words, so I would just, they try to tell you in context what the Spanish words are, but I would just say that muy means very, or something, and keep going. And he just loved, he's very visual, he's very good with design and color. He, when I brought the pictures of like the Sphinx and so forth, he wasn't really that interested in it. He found this Egyptian art and was noticing all the detail and pattern of that artwork. And I just think he has a real good eye for color. He loves colors and examining the colors and using them. So he's very artistic and creative. And so he has a lot of things to go on there to keep you busy with.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I'm then reading aloud. So it's school-based reading at home. Because I don't think you should feel like you have to teach them to read. I think you should be able to reinforce what they're doing at school. So you're reinforcing his reading, encouraging him to read independently the best you can, and reading aloud. And just keep it short and regular, rather than long and occasionally. So, okay, this is now good enough. I just thought of it again, so.